Vivian Liu.
Hello everyone here. My name is Vivian and today I'm going to be showing you my project Fireheart. Fireheart is a comic book I've been working on since the beginning of my MFA program. And today I'm going to be covering the plot of the story, my inspiration for the comic, and show you some concept work along the way. I'm not always a comic artist. Back in 2020, I got my BFA in 3D animation from MCAD, and I spent most of my time building skills for animation like 3D modeling, 3D rendering, and most of it is focused on technical art. And this was one of the final projects I did for the BFA degree. It's called Rowdy Roundup, and it's a story about two cowboys fighting for the ownership of a town that's physically too small for the both of them to be in. And one of the biggest attraction to storytelling is the space for me to imagine different things. I'm interested in the study of humanity, so kind of thinking about how people live, what would they own, and what would their life be like. And I'm gravitate towards this part of the process in animation, which is the building up of the world and the storytelling. I read a lot of fictional novels, especially fantasy. And while studying animation, I find that the environmental and character design stage of the process is the most fun out of all of them. My major was in 3D animation, so I'm working mostly digital, but my main tool has always been illustration. As part of the design process. I like working in pencils and watercolor to help give me some development for the characters and space and the landscape. After completing my BFA, I wanted to transition into making work on more complex subject matter, displaying themes that reflects the current state of the world and the political climate. So I began working on the story of Fireheart. The story of Fireheart is set in the land of Silver Garden Peninsula, where they're a powerful country at war for land and resources. In the current state of this world, humans are taking over the control of the land and harvesting every last drop of resources from the nature without giving back anything. The story centers around a young hunter named Yora, who goes on a journey to stop the resource war from causing irreversible damage to the balance of nature. Yora is born in a secluded land called the Dragon Ridge Mountain. And prior to the start of the story, her village was attacked by a powerful empire who had their eyes on the resources the village owns. And when the story begins 10 years after the event, Yora is one of the last survivors of her people, and she finds herself able to move on from the loss of her culture. And the book follows Yora as she discovers her power to become the key to change the world. And the story was inspired by a range of works. Yora's character is inspired by different fictional characters. I pulled a lot of inspiration from Miyazaki, both in the storytelling and also his methodology in studio practice. So works from him, Nausicaa of the Wind Valley, Princess Mononoke, and outside of that also take a lot of inspiration from manga in general. So one of the work that stands out is Yukido Kishiro's Alita Battle Angel. Has a lot of influence on Yora's visual as well. I also took inspiration from novels in general. I'm a big fan of A Song of Ice and Fires from George R.R. Martin. And in many ways, the protagonist in his book, Daenerys Targaryen, also shaped the way I designed Yora's personality. The plot of the stories is also inspired by The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And in his book, there is a young shepherd who decides to step out of his comfort zone to achieve his dream of finding treasure in the distant land. He talks about the idea of this thing called a personal legend, which is a goal that everyone has in their life to fulfill themselves. And I wanted Yora's desire for change in the world to be her main motivation, to go out of her comfort zone and achieve the goal that she always wanted. Fireheart is my first time making a comic. Initially, I had the intention for this story to be a concept for a 3D game or an animation. But considering the various challenges of making an animation, time and labor and finance, I decided that before that's possible, I need to have a solid foundation, which is a narrative to push my characters forward. So I began to make the story into a comic book. And I feel that comic art is a more liberating medium than animation, and I wanted to own the creative process from start to finish. I want to have more time to build on the world and open up more room for creative writing, and I wouldn't need to worry about the length of the story like I would for an animation or a game production. But one of the biggest challenges I had transitioning from an animator to being a comic artist is the sense of timing. I was really used to time being real time. Animation is a time-based media. It's one image after another, working in mostly one aspect ratio. But in comics, I'm working with multiple moments, multiple panels laid out on the same page. This page, for example, I wanted to build the suspense of the hunt. So the pacing is created in comics by the relationship between each panel. The readers perceive the sense of time by seeing the panel in context with another panel. And coming from an animated background, I had to actively resist the habit to show every moment of an action. So I took more time to experiment on choosing what moment to show instead of showing, for example, like a character reaching for something. I think I have an instinct of trying to show the hand raising up, moving forward, grabbing the object, and then finally a shot of the person holding something. But in comics, you can just show 2 moments, and that will make the flow of the story more steady. I also had initially the challenges that I overcrowd a page because I wanted the story to be condensed. I was really focusing on the page count of the story as if I were to worry about the final time of an animation. I wanted to keep it concise, so I put too much image into one page and the thumbnail was all over the page. It was very, very chaotic. So I learned over time to really let the image speak for itself. And one of the solutions I find to be very helpful is to set the beat of each page. I have a point that I want to make on the page, and that's my main purpose when I'm designing the layout of that. The ultimate solution from transitioning from animator to a comic artist is to have people just read the book for you, because I don't always have the clarity that somebody else would when I'm working on the pages. So it's really helpful to draw the layouts of different pages and then take it to someone so that they can read it and tell you if they understand what you're trying to say. Yora's background story is inspired by the colonial history of Taiwan, and I wanted to draw more visuals of Yora's home from Taiwanese nature. And the Dragon Ridge Forest is inspired by different mountain ranges in Taiwan. The center of our country is made out of tall ranges of mountain with subtropical plants that makes them look green year-round. There's a great variety of vegetation because of our climate, and I wanted to incorporate these locations in Taiwan to celebrate the beauty of the country and also highlight the cool, unique plant lives from it. These mountains are also protective over the lives on the island too. Whenever we have a typhoon that's going across the entire island, the mountains actually cut the power of that typhoon usually in half because of how tall they are. The trees I'm showing here is called the Taiwanese cypress, and it's a species found unique in Taiwan. They tend to grow really tall, about 40 meters, and historically been used to construct temples and shrines. And these cypresses are one of the oldest trees in Taiwan. Some can be found to be over 4,000-year-old and are considered sacred trees in the culture. They're currently considered endangered species because of how much was cut down during the Japanese occupation in Taiwan, and that was about from the late 1800s to the end of World War II. The piece of history during that colonial time is one that inspired the story of Yora, how the damage done to her people didn't just end with her village being destroyed. It permanently altered the land where nothing has been able to grow since then. Kind of like the cypresses in Taiwan, even though laws were enacted to prohibit the cutting down of the tree more than 80 years ago, but the cypresses never recovered and is still in the danger of extinction. Fireheart at its core is an examination of the relationship between humans and nature, and Yora's story is an exploration of heroism within the chaotic world. Her rise to power is a symbol that a barren environment can sometimes grow the most resilient new life. The work of this first chapter has been really enjoyable to work from beginning to end, and I'm currently working on more content for Fireheart for my thesis project, which will introduce new characters and offer a different perspective in the world. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
Vivian, why are you so cool? I'm just kidding. Well, you are cool. But I wanted to ask you, how are you basing your color palette? One, and two, if in the future, do you see possibility of collaborating with other people for the background images and whatnot? Because it can get quite handful to draw a comic on your own.
Yeah, I think coming from an animation background makes me really used to being collaborative with other people, especially different aspect can take advantage of other people's talent towards that. Currently, I'm working on it independently, but I constantly have people reading through the story and editing it. So I'm already working with a bunch of people. Definitely open to more people helping me because I have a big vision for this world. I think it would be fitting for all other artists to be also a contributor to it. Yes.
Can you talk about your process with like the writing and storyboarding and how that interacts with your illustration process?
Yeah, and I think when I first started, it was because of the intention was it for it be an animation. So I did a lot of it in the way I would developing animation. So doing storyboard in that certain horizontal aspect ratio, but more thinking about there's certain moments that I find that comes to me more often, like beats of the story. And I think first step is to draw that out, and I or write to that moment to think about the rest of the world, what it's like. And then I'm piecing together the other parts of the puzzle, so then the story will make sense as a whole.
With watercolors, how do you go from working with that to pen? Are you going to include more watercolor into the finished comic? Or is it more just for thinking out your ideas?
Yeah, it was very difficult transitioning from, I'm a really messy drawer, so I draw a lot of lines and hopefully they make sense by the end. So in the watercolor sketches, I tend to let it be a little bit looser, but when it comes to the final inking has to be really precise. So I didn't have a lot of challenge of that process, just trying to really get the physics and volume of the things correctly. But it's also that you see me tend to hatch a lot, make mark makings to help bring that original feeling of the sketch into the final without losing that texture.
You talk a lot about the challenge of going from animation to comics. I'm wondering, did you find in doing that and in working on a comic that you got any kind of maybe insight or worked on any skills that influenced how you might work on animation, or if that's something you've thought about, if it's given you a new perspective on other mediums that you've worked with before or might work with again.
Yeah, and I think I underestimate how much work goes into making a fully realized story. I read a lot of novels, I watch a lot of films and TV, but at the end of the day, making your own story also, it makes sense in my mind, but when I'm actually doing it, it doesn't always make sense. So there's a lot of big challenge of the layouts of not just the panels itself on pages, but also the actual illustration itself. And I think it helps a lot to have a lot of comics in my hand to reference to, but that ultimately did bring back the skills of visual storytelling, and it's definitely beneficial to, if I were to adapt this comic into different medias in the future, I think all the elements will still persist in the final product.
Thank you.
I have a question about, you talked about your BFA final project, the Cowboys,
Mm-hmm.
and I was wondering what happened after you graduate, and then from then to the MFA, your theme changed from Cowboys to reminiscent of your home country, Taiwan.
Yeah, when I was in undergrad, I was really obsessed with the culture of cowboys and Western culture in general. And I think I was the nature of the major of animation being a little bit more family friendly. I was influenced a lot by more kid targeted TV shows and film. So that's why partly when I was learning the art of animation, I worked on a lot more cartoon inspired artwork. But after graduation, it was the year of 2020. So you there's a big jump of coming from a more collaborative medium, and then you go into an isolation era where you have to rely on yourself more. And I think I just took a lot of time to read through comic books more often and watch more film, which then makes me transition from working a more younger targeted audience to a much more mature, which I think it's just my own preference of wanting to make work for an older audience. For somebody our age, like 18 and above, tackle on some of the topic that has been on the news more often.
How is your relationship with a finished media going from the finished media remaining in a digital world to a medium that is physical and you actually get to touch and interact with?
Yeah, it's actually really satisfying because all of my previous work has always lived digitally. So I guess it's easy and also hard because there's also very few platforms that you can find to publish your work. And having a physical work is very rewarding in that sense. You get to print out your book and you get to give it to people, which is very satisfying. But I think I've always liked working traditionally in that sense, from concept. So I always have physical work for the pre-production part. And I chose to work traditionally also for this comic. Main goal is to have all the archives also be in my hand, and I feel like the physicality of it is much more different and more rewarding compared to being a digital artist.
Thank you so much. Please give a round.